Welcome to DLS's Teacher Training Module, preparing students for the DLI OPI test. Let's get started. The purpose of this presentation is to learn about two tests that students may take if they work for the U.S. Department of Defense. The DoD includes military people, of course, but also many civilians. If your students will be taking these tests, it will help for you to understand them so that you can more effectively prepare your students. Let's look at the objectives of the module. By the end of this module, you will know what the DLI OPI test is and how it is structured. Understand the types of questions that may be asked in the OPI. Understand how the DLI OPI is conducted. Know about techniques and resources to help students prepare for the OPI. OPI stands for Oral Proficiency Interview. An oral proficiency interview is just another way of doing a speaking test. Many organizations do an OPI. DLS does them as part of our regular language tests. The DLI OPI, the speaking test that DLI administers, has some special features. Not all students who work with the DoD will be taking an OPI. Ask your students about this at the beginning of the course. Some students, for their work, will mostly need to be able to listen and read in their target language. Speaking is not as important for them. In practice, we should never neglect speaking, but there is no need to prepare for a speaking test if the students will not be taking it. The DLI OPI is rated on the familiar ILR speaking scale, 0 to 5. It is the same scale used in all government speaking tests and in many private ones. These tests are done by DLI Monterey or by a company they have hired to do the testing. The students will almost certainly be tested over the phone since testers are all over the country. It's important to practice speaking on the phone if your student is going to take a DLI OPI. An OPI is a procedure for obtaining a sample of the student's speaking proficiency. The testers want to find out if certain elements are present. These elements are detected and measured by having the students perform certain speaking tasks. The test also measures how many of these elements are present in the sample. Now let's talk about speaking tasks for different levels and what they involve. Level 1 can be thought of as the survivor level. Students speak just enough to get by at a basic level. Here we've used a caveman to represent level 1 speakers. Level 2 speakers can be thought of as storytellers and are able to string together a story with simple narration. Level 3 is the thinker level, and students at this level should be able to present abstract thoughts with firm points of view in their target language. OPI tests for each of these levels test speakers for skills specific to each level. Here are the tasks that the DLI OPI assigns to level 1, or the survivor level. Notice that a role play will be included. This will be uncomplicated, but it's important to practice role playing with the students who will take this test so that they're comfortable with it. Since this is level 1, all the speaking should be done in complete sentences. There will be times when the student does not understand or needs to have a question repeated. This is expected at level 1, but make sure your students know how to do this in a foreign language and over the telephone. Here are the level 2 speaking tasks. As you can see, there are quite a few. Since this is level 2, the answers should be at the paragraph level, several sentences linked together in a logical way. The first 3 tasks are about narration, telling a story. The student should recognize that a question like, "Tell me how you got your first job," is asking for a narration. A simple short answer like, "My uncle hired me," is not satisfactory at level 2. There should be a story. The role play at level 2 will have a complication. "We lost your reservation at the hotel," or "We don't have that sweater in the color you wanted." The student will have to get around the complication somehow. They can't just give up. Notice too that the tasks include reporting facts about current events. Your student will have to know what is going on in the world and be able to talk about it in a simple, factual way. Let's take a moment to compare OPI tasks for Level 1 and Level 2. Remember, Level 1 involves having short, simple conversations about more basic topics, as well as role-playing typical daily interactions. Level 2, on the other hand, will involve narrating things from the past, present, and future, giving instructions, directions, and descriptions, reporting on current events, and role-playing conversations that involve complications. Now let's look at Level 3 speaking tasks. Here are the tasks for speaking at Level 3. Here, the student needs to present ideas and defend a point of view. It is important to be organized and clear. It's important to have a definite point of view and speak up firmly. This is not the place for holding back. The OPI interview includes 4 basic phases, but some will be repeated during the test. First is the warm-up phase. During this phase, the testers will ask general questions and questions about the interviewee's personal background. This lets them customize questions later in the test. It also gives them a general idea of the interviewee's level. Next is a level check. The testers will ask the examinee to perform one of the tasks required for their estimated level. This will be in the form of a question, not instructions to perform a task. Students should be prepared to recognize what the task is behind the tester's questions. Then comes the level probe. A level probe asks the examinee to try a task at the next highest level. So if the testers estimate that the student is a level 2, they will try a level 3 question. The examinee's performance on the level probe will either confirm the original level estimate or lead the testers to consider whether the student might be at a higher level. Additional level checks and level probes will follow. There will be at least 2 level probes during the test and level checks for all of the tasks at the level the testers think the student has reached. Finally, there is a wind down. This is easy small talk that is meant to leave the student feeling that the interview was not that bad. For example, here is a diagram of a test for a level 2 student. After the warm-up, which is at a fairly low level, the testers will do 2 level checks. Remember, these checks will be at the level the student is expected to be at, here a level 2. Then the testers do a level probe to see whether the student can perform a level 3 task. In the diagram, assuming the student was not able to fully perform the level 3 task, the testers would return to a level 2 and do 2 more level 2 checks. Next is another level probe, and if the student again did not perform fully the level 3 task, the testers will return to level 2 checks and finish with an easier wind down. Remember that OPI means Oral Proficiency Interview, and DLI is not the only organization that does OPI tests. Students from the U.S. government can take a DLI-style OPI, but the methods and levels for ACTFL and DLI are directly related, as this slide shows. ACTFL has broken down levels 1 and 2 into low, intermediate, and high ranges. At schools and universities in the USA, language programs are not usually intensive, so students might not advance a full level on the ILR for a long time. So, it is useful to have scores that reflect progress within one ILR level. The ACTFL is a very large and active organization, and you can find many resources on the internet that are relevant to the DLI OPI. After this presentation is over, you might find it helpful to visit the websites listed here to learn more about the ACTFL OPI and levels and the resources the ACTFL has made available. Now let's try creating our own level check tasks. Spend about 5 minutes brainstorming 2 questions you can ask a student at level 2. One question should be designed to get the student to produce a narration. The other should have the student describe a place or a person. Remember, you must create a question that results in the student doing these tasks. You should not just ask them to narrate a story or describe someone. Use what you already know about the student as a starting point for your question. Pause the presentation while you work on this task and resume when you are ready to continue. Let's go over some questions you could ask for these tasks. If a student said they enjoy skiing, you could ask them to tell you about one day of the recent skiing trip. This gives students a set period of time to discuss, one day, with a logical progression, beginning in the morning and ending that night, and allows students the opportunity to include details or other elements that show their language skills. For the second question, asking for a description of a place the student knows well allows them to talk about it in many different ways. The goal is to get the student to talk long enough to get a good sample of what the student knows. Here are some things to try and some to avoid when helping students prepare for the DLI OPI. Try letting the student talk without helping. Just listen and smile. You should not interrupt the student to correct them or give them words that they are having trouble remembering. If the student does not adequately answer the question, ask them a follow-up. If they do not give you an adequate response, do not move along to other questions. Frame the question for the students based on what they've already discussed in the interview. Don't just ask completely unrelated questions that seem to come out of nowhere. Give the student an idea of the kind of answers you want by asking them to talk about something in detail or to tell you all about it. Don't ask overly long questions, hoping it will encourage the student to talk more themselves. Most of the interview should be the student talking, not the interviewer. Lastly, recycle questions. Bring up the same question at a later time, particularly if the student struggled to answer it. This allows them to improve, review, or expand their answer. However, do not ask the exact same question over and over again. This will become boring and encourage the student to produce the same memorized answer. Finally, here are some things to keep in mind as you prepare students for the DLI OPI. Make sure you and your students know and practice all the tasks for the level you are working towards. Train your students to recognize the task behind different questions and concentrate on completing the task as fully as possible. Encourage your students to say more, not just answer the question and stop. Finally, remind your students that if the tester interrupts them and moves on to another question, it is only a sign that the tester has completed that part of the sample. Testers are often in a hurry. Thank you for watching this presentation on preparing for the DLI OPI. If you have any questions, please contact your language training supervisor.